In 1917, Russia was falling apart. The people were hungry, soldiers were exhausted, and the government was collapsing. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, took control, promising bread, land, and peace. The October Revolution permanently changed Russia, replacing protest with a struggle for power. In the early 1900s, the Russian Empire was struggling with war, poverty, inequality, and a weak government. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks, who were one of the two socialist groups that led the Russian Revolution in 1917, overthrew the Russian government because they wanted a system where the people of Russia had equality. Because the system they lived under did not support or represent them, it was their responsibility to revolt against their government, and the Bolsheviks were promising certain rights, including equality for women and minorities. This led to the creation of the Union of Soviet Social Republics, or USSR, which changed politics, influenced wars and governments worldwide for the 20th century, and brought decades of Soviet rule. For over 350 years, the Russian Tsar ruled with absolute power. Tsar Nicholas II was the latest in this long line, making every decision while most Russians lived in poverty. The majority were peasants, overworked, underpaid, and struggled under terrible conditions. The economy was weak, and the gap between the rich and the poor kept growing. The government ignored the suffering of the people, leading to rising frustration and demands for change. Things worsened after the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Russia expected an easy victory but had suffered a humiliating defeat, exposing military weaknesses. Food shortages, inflation, and job losses pushed many to their breaking points. Protests and strikes erupted across the country, demanding reforms. In January of 1905, thousands of peaceful protesters gathered outside the Winter Palace, hoping to present their grievances to the Tsar. Instead, troops opened fire, killing hundreds in what became known as Bloody Sunday. The massacre sparked the 1905 revolution, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to create the Duma, a legislative body meant to give citizens a voice in government, though its power remained limited. Russia's involvement in World War I worsened its struggles. Soldiers were sent to war while the economy crumbled. Food and resources ran out, and desperation turned into hatred towards the monarchy. Many Russians lost faith in their leaders and sought alternatives. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, communist theorists, which called for workers to overthrow the rich and take control of production and government, gained popularity. To further weaken Russia, Germany sent Vladimir Lenin to Russia to spread these ideals and weaken the Russian rule. By February 1917, protests erupted in Petrograd. Workers, soldiers, and peasants were fed up with the food shortages, war, inequality, and government incompetence. When nothing changed, protests turned into a revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was forced to step down, and a provisional government took over. However, it failed to solve Russia's deep problems and kept the country in the war. Many felt nothing had changed and demand real action. The Mensheviks, Bolsheviks, and their leaders, such as Lenin, promised to end the war, give land to peasants, and grant workers control over factories, fueling further revolutionary anger towards the new government, and so protesting continued. By October, the people had enough once more. Lenin had become the figurehead of the revolution. He and the Bolsheviks promised basic rights like land, peace, and improved working conditions for all the people of Russia. The people organized protests and fought against their government, and on October 25th, they invaded the Winter Palace in Petrograd, where the provisional government seat of power was located. There was little conflict and the takeover was quick. The Bolsheviks claimed leadership when the provisional government fell.
Крестьянская революция, о необходимости которой все время говорили большевики, совершилась!
Lenin and the Bolsheviks made sweeping changes once they took power. They signed a peace agreement with Germany, finally getting the Russian people out of the Great War. The government took the lands of the wealthy aristocracy of the past and redistributed them to the people. Massive reforms to education and healthcare were introduced, and workers were promised the control over companies. Women were given rights such as the ability to vote in elections and the right to be employed. It was the responsibility of the Russian people to advocate for the government they wanted to represent them, which led to some who stood against the revolution, as not all Russians backed up the Bolsheviks. The Red Army of the Bolsheviks was fighting the White Army, made up of the loyalists to the monarchy and those who saw non-communist ideologies as the way forward. The Russian Civil War began just as the revolution had ended in success for the Bolsheviks. The Reds used strong leadership, terror tactics, and control of important cities, while the Whites were divided, poorly coordinated, and struggled to gain support. Other groups, like the anarchists, nationalists, and foreign powers, played minor roles in the war. By 1922, the Reds had crushed the Whites' resistance. On December 10th of that year, Lenin and the Bolsheviks declared the formation of the Union of Soviet Social Republics.
Like a Dutch uncle.
Во всем мире растет союз коммунистов. В ряде стран победила уже советская власть. Еще недолго, и мы увидим победу.
Officially consolidating their power. With control assured, they enacted their major reforms. Education expanded, leading to significant rise in literacy rates. Their new economic policy, NEP, helped stabilize the economy and improved agriculture production after years of war. In 1924, Lenin died after a series of strokes, leaving a power vacuum within the Communist Party. Joseph Stalin, initially seen as a lesser figure, outmaneuvered more prominent revolutionaries, including Leon Trotsky. By the late 1920s, Stalin had firmly taken control as Premier of the Soviet Union. He quickly began enforcing policies that shifted the USSR to a more authoritarian regime, making a new Soviet era in Soviet history. Changed the Soviet government into a strict dictatorship where fear silenced opposition. Using terror and forcing rapid expansion, he eliminated rivals and drove millions to death and starvation. The bloodshed continued during World War II, when the Soviet Union lost about 20 million people, and many cities were destroyed. After the war, the Soviet Union became one of the two superpowers that defined the new global order, with the United States as its rival during the Cold War, which was made up of proxy wars, espionage, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. Stalin's changes still affect the former Soviet republics today, influencing poverty, population shifts, architecture, and international views of the post-Soviet world. The Cold War also reshaped the modern era, solidifying the United States as the dominant global superpower and shifting U.S. politics to the right. The Cold War's legacy is shown in conflicts like the situation in Korea, U.S.-sponsored coups in Latin America, and to some extent the war in Ukraine. All of this can be traced back to the October Revolution. Early in the 1900s, the Russian Empire was battling war, famine, and a poor government. The Bolsheviks overthrew the Russian government in October 1917 in search of a society in which the Russian people would enjoy with equal treatment. Because the system they lived under did not support or represent them, it was their responsibility to revolt against their government, and the Bolsheviks were promising certain rights, including equality for women and minorities. This altered history because it resulted in the creation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, changing politics for the 20th century and bringing decades of Soviet control. Russian workers and peasants wanted more say in their nation and improved quality of living. The revolution allowed them the chance to form serious changes that resulted in the start of a new leadership. The revolution leaders had to make hard decisions in the interest of the people. While not every leader was good, and thus not all people considered the revolution as the will of the people, either way, this revolution and the subsequent events that redefined the world back then and still heavily influence the world today in the way that people see politics, the world, Eastern Europe, and progressive people lead movements.